Hey there, everyone. So we're going to start the webinar right now. My name is Lauren. I'm an intern for GreenAllies. I'm the one who's been organizing the webinars. If you watched the last one, then you'll know who I am. I just kind of wanted to do a quick introduction before we start the actual webinar. So this one's going to be about diversity and inclusion in the environmental movement. It's going to be part kind of a learning experience and part conversation. So we're going to have hopefully two presenters, but only one is working right now. So we'll see where that goes. And we'll be able to, I'll be asking them questions, just kind of guiding them along. Oh, is this working for Kim? Okay, I'll just keep going. And then after that's over, you guys can ask questions on the chat function. You can ask them while they're speaking, or also at the end, we'll kind of have a section where questions will be able to be asked. So this is just kind of going to be about diversity and inclusion in terms of clubs, campaigns, getting involved, and also kind of learning about what environmental justice is and how it plays into the mainstream environmental movement. So before we start, I'm just going to talk about GreenAllies for a quick sec. You'll see that on the handout section, there's a little number 2. There's a handout right there about how to get more involved in GreenAllies, and there's also a handout about, there's a report that was done that actually ties in really well to this webinar. It is about diversity in the environmental movement and kind of the state of it. It's really, really thorough, one of the most thorough ones out there. They looked at 200 nonprofits, 70 government organizations, and 20 foundations. It investigates gender and racial diversity. It's just super thorough. It's a great read. It's a bit dense, so if you want to wait until school starts when you're in the mindset, that would be great. But it's very interesting, and it's a nice foundation for this webinar. So ways to get involved in the network quickly. You can register the club at your school. There are links to all of these things in the handout. So you can get on that link and register the club. You have to fill out a quick form. You can also submit a project to our database, or you can look at our database to find other schools have done. Just a way to talk to other schools, get inspired, and inspire others. We also have a way to to communicate between clubs. So we have a Facebook group that I linked to in the handout, and also a newsletter that I also linked to, so you can sign up for that if you want to. And then finally, we have a networking event. That's an annual student-run event. In 2018, which is the most recent one, it will be at Swarthmore College in Philly. And we're also going to be putting together one more webinar and some more networking events online for people who can't attend. Our next webinar is going to be on August 11th, I believe, but there'll be an email going out about that in the Facebook group. And that's going to be about how to empower and inspire others who are in environmental clubs. So if you are in a club, or if you're a leader in a club, or if you just, or if you are a leader in any other kind of club, it'll be a great webinar for you. So the webinar itself for today, we're going to have just one speaker. It seems like Kim, her camera and mic aren't working right now, which is unfortunate. Kim is from Clean Water Action. She's the environmental justice organizer. She's going to keep trying to get her camera and mic to work until hopefully it does. But if not, we have Victoria Robinson. She is from the Office of Environmental Justice at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. So they're just kind of be talking us through what environmental justice is and kind of how it relates to being involved in the movement if you're a college student. So Victoria, you can, got a chat. Okay, Kim can hear us, which is a great start, and hopefully she'll be able to find out how to work the rest of everything. So Victoria, if you could. Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you? So everyone, this is Victoria Robinson. If I can just ask you to quickly introduce yourself, give us an overview of what you do, and kind of how it relates to environmental justice.
Hi. Yes. Okay. My name is Victoria Robinson, and I am, as Lauren has explained, I work for EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. I've actually worked for EPA for today will be 1 month shy of 14 years, and I've been in the Office of Environmental Justice the entire time. Currently, I serve as the lead for stakeholder engagement for the Office of Environmental Justice. Prior to that, I was the lead and the what they call the designated federal officer. I ran the Federal Advisory Committee for Environmental Justice, which is called the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, the NEJAC. Um, I have been, my job currently focuses on identifying opportunities for improving stakeholder engagement and doing it strategically for both within our agency, helping our other offices work through that, as well as working directly with communities. And how in the world did I get involved in environment? I have an accounting degree. And I'm a firm believer, just because you have a degree in something does not mean that you're going to end up in that area. Um, I ended up getting a job because I also was the editor there of Georgetown's newspaper, Georgetown University. And I always wanted to be a business writer. But because I could write, a friend of mine got me involved in environmental consulting and contracting. And I came on board. And what do you do when you're in a room full of scientists? Somebody told me I need to find a niche. So I got into stakeholder management, managing stakeholder processes, as well as environmental justice. And I've been doing that now for 20 plus years. So it's never about where you think you're going to start off, but it's about where your heart takes you. And it's kind of like led me to social justice in an arena that I never even knew existed, until about 22 years ago.
Did you have any kind of interest in the environmental movement before you got involved in it?
I'm of the age where um, when the whole idea of conserving, protecting the environment was, that was part of our psyche growing up. We would, in art, you painted pictures of pollution flowing down rivers, that was what it was. So I was always interested in it. I never thought that it was something that I'd be doing something in. But you also have to remember when I graduated from high school and from college, there was no such thing as environmental law. I'd wanted to be a lawyer, but the only law I knew about was what I saw on TV. And if I had known about environmental law as an option, I probably would have become a lawyer, like I originally planned. And so the environment has always been something that I know has been it's in the back of my mind, but I never really knew how to make a career out of that. It's something that's evolved. And I think students today are in a better position to be able to be more proactive about being able to make that a conscious effort, a conscious part of their career.
Yeah, absolutely. But right now, you are very clearly super involved in the environmental movement, and you're for the Office of Environmental Justice. And I was just wondering if you could kind of give everyone an overview of what environmental justice is to you and kind of how people in your department also kind of define it.
Yeah. Environmental justice in a very broad scope is simply about making sure that the environmental burdens and the environmental benefits are borne fairly across all segments of society. That's really what the bottom line is. We know that there's, in a perfect world, there wouldn't be any environmental burdens, um, but there are always environmental benefits. And some people have been able to enjoy those benefits much more so than others. So what the Office of Environmental Justice, which started off as the Office of Environmental Equity initially, was about how to tackle what was then an emerging concept, um, equity in the environmental, social justice, if you will, equity in the environmental decision making. And our job is to continue to, one, serve not only the folks who are in the agency, we're talking about other staffers, those people who will make the decisions around permits and rulemaking, that we help them to better understand about how their decisions can impact vulnerable populations, those who are underserved and overburdened. At the same time, we also see we have our constituency are those outside of EPA in other federal agencies, as well as within, especially with communities and other stakeholders, and trying to make sure that we can help facilitate the opportunity for communities, the impacted communities, that their voices are heard. So that's really where we try to make sure that we don't speak for communities, but we help facilitate them getting to the table and having their own voices.
Are there any kind of problems that have led to a need for environmental justice? Like, are there any big ones or any just kind of general ones that have kind of like plagued the movement that you can think of?
I think things that have led to environmental inequities, they've grown out of the whole concept of those inherent social disparities that plague low-income populations, people of color, and sometimes gender, sometimes women who also shoulder a big responsibility within environmental advocacy. And it's because it's around those disparities that are associated with where people live, work, play, learn, and recreate. And when you don't have access to decision making, don't have access to being to actual, good health, it has an impact on how well you are able to bear the burden that comes from living in close proximity to even low emissions. So to me, a lot of the root cause is in the inherent social disparities that as a society, we need to address. And that is why you don't just look at fixing an environmental issue. You have to look at the overall puzzle and put the pieces together. Because if you fix one thing, you can cause unintended impacts elsewhere. But if you take a look at it holistically, you'll find out that, what we thought might be the better angle is actually not really the best for what the community needs. So those are the kind of problems. Mainstream, to a large extent, mainstream environmental groups grew out of a concept of we've got to protect and conserve our natural resources. That's the lens they were looking through. But environmental groups, community-based groups particularly, are looking through a lens of social justice, how to improve and enhance my quality of life. And that's been where sometimes you end up getting conflicts come into play, where, for example, now youth engagement has been a big component of a lot of local community-based organizations. Now, some of the larger mainstream organizations are looking at youth engagement as the next step for them when they've been focusing on making youth aware of issues. And now, who's going to be the ones champion youth engagement? Those who've been doing it for a long time, or those who are going to get the money because they're a big organization. So you have a lot of I don't want to call it fighting, but you have organizations at odds with one another because of whose issue is it, who's getting the money to fight something that we've been doing all along, and vice versa, going on and on and on. So those were, I think, some of the where some of those issues come from, and some people call it, appropriation of their issues. Others think of it as being a difficult, the whole idea of gentrification coming in and hearing our voices and letting us speak for ourselves, not coming in just because we may be poor, just because we may not be, college educated, which people don't really understand communities in, that therefore they cannot speak for themselves. And so that's where some of the issues come from.
Yeah, there's definitely historically been a lack of diversity in the mainstream environmental movement. If the people are more interested in that, I mentioned before, but there's a handout that has a report on the current state of diversity in the movement, and just kind of shows that even though there's been a push in recent years to include more, it's still not where it could be, and it still kind of causes the same problems that Victoria was talking about. So now that we've kind of done an overview of the environmental justice as a whole and in terms of the movement, it'd be good to relate it to the people who are watching, who are mostly college students. So how might college students be lacking in the same kind of diversity and inclusion besides just maybe not having the the traditionally diverse membership bases?
That was a question that puzzled me as I was preparing for this. And so I reached out to one of the young women who I'm mentoring in our office. She is, yeah, I wanted to get that much more youthful perspective than I've had, and who has worked with and continues to work closely with some of our partnering universities. And we settled on the concept of, she pointed out to me how a lot of what college clubs who are working on environmental issues are focused on the sustainability of the campus. So you have folks working on recycling, you have people working on composting, some even going on and working on disinvesting in fossil fuel companies. And those are all about the issues of again, it's equating to preserving, conserving the natural resources. So it's at that same level, and that's wonderful. I'm glad to see that happening. But when you talk about the lack of diversity, sometimes that lack of diversity is in that when you're having a very narrow lens of how you're viewing what you're doing, and sometimes you don't realize that there are, and we're still learning it. We still go through this ourselves. So it's not something that's unique to college students or the next generation. It's every generational level. The whole idea of silos and needing to reach out and think about who else has an impact on, who else is impacted by these decisions or lack thereof, and how do we reach out to them? For example, there are, I'm sure, social justice organizations on a campus. I know when I went to Georgetown, we had, Catholic students focusing on social justice issues within, like with immigration, things like that. And then we had a Black Student Alliance and a Latin Student Alliance. We were working on our own little issues. And then, so we never communicated with one another. We never collaborated with one another. And I think that diversity of perspective, even in a more homogeneous type of community, campus community, there's still a diversity of perspective that needs to be brought together. And I think that's where sometimes looking at what diversity is and defining that. Sometimes looking at your own organization and realizing, we're all males or we're all females. What have we done to try to reach out to bridge a gender gap if there is one? And I think that will help prepare anybody, students and teachers, to start thinking along those lines outside of the college environment. When you move on and want to continue advocating and getting involved in your local community, by understanding and looking at and learning about others who have a stake in those same issues, can help you work together, realizing that, as my young colleague said, that we all live in the same dependent ecosystem, and understanding that this is the same ecosystem, whether it's a natural ecosystem or a one constructed, such as a university community.
Yeah. That definitely kind of hit on my next question, which are some ways to solve this. So definitely just kind of getting more involved with other clubs who could be working on the same kind of issues and realizing that everything is interrelated. The movement is such an intersectional movement, and it's only very recently that it's become more obvious at least in the mainstream sense.
Yes.
That you can intersect with people who are working on racial justice or gender or class or even like ideology. All of that stuff can relate to the movement if you just kind of go out of the traditional comfort zone of, like you said, of just conservation and preservation and that kind of stuff.
Right. Or sometimes it takes, and I'll give an example of one of the communities that I've worked with in North Carolina, where it was a Black community within a larger white community, and they were fighting water infrastructure, dealing with water infrastructure issues. And the director of that organization, he finally realized, I've got to get and collaborate with more than just the academic communities, we need to get more people champion our cause. So we helped people to understand how the issue that community was facing was impacting downriver 300 miles away, because their community was at the headwaters, which then of this whole watershed. And it he brought these people in who were river keepers, who were the watershed managers, who dealt with recreation stuff, where way downriver, and they never even knew what was going on up at the headwaters. But when they found out that this lack of water infrastructure and sewer was actually what was responsible for all of the sewage waste that was going downriver, affecting fishing, affecting other recreation, he got them to help them to be champions for him. And that's part of the same thing, is understanding how different parts play into and affect that whole same outcome.
They actually have a question from Pune. I really hope that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. If not, I'm sorry. It says, how did you get people to attend the educational sessions? I think that they're just kind of referring to the like the collaboration between the community and the people investigating the watershed, and how did you disseminate that information in the rest of the impacted community? You didn't actually do this yourself, did you? It was like a project that you just know about, correct?
Oh no, I was involved in that.
Oh, wonderful.
I've been involved in lots of different projects over the years.
Got it.
And for example, one of the key principles that that communities have taught us in our office is that you engage where people are. And so one of the first things is, too often we have local government, state government, even sometimes federal government. Oh, we're going to have a public meeting, and you hold it during the day. So without any regard for how people are, whether they're available, whether they trust the local government who's convening the thing. So again, looking at how you engage people where they are. That could be a combination of, you put words out using a billboard. We're talking about going old school sometimes.
Yeah.
In communities, a billboard that just might be a great place for static information. It's located right at an intersection where people stay at a long light, and this way they have an opportunity, they could take a look at it. Using direct mail as a combination with social media, then you're actually tapping into different types of target members of the community: young, old, literate, not so literate, and getting information out that way. And you also look for and you work with local champions. Those are the people whose issues those are, and you rely on them to work their network. Sometimes it's through churches, sometimes it's through schools, sometimes it's through community neighborhood organizations. So how do you get people to attend it? You have to really think about what the purpose is, what you're trying to get out of it, because each type of session should be different. Sometimes it's an open house, which you do it on a time and a date when people can actually get there. You think about what's keeping people. Why aren't single moms attending? Well, we should have some childcare here. Maybe have activities for kids to be engaged so that the mothers can actually go around, or the single dads can actually go around and understand and participate. Information you can disseminate in a variety of ways. I know we're moving more and more to green technology, using the web and all that stuff, but sometimes you still got to go old school. When I was in Flint last year, I spent 7 weeks in Flint, Michigan with the water stuff. Some of the things that we learned, one of the things that we focused on initially was to try to understand how people got their information. And we discovered, we went to churches, because several of us are very active in our churches. So while we were there, we were working, 3 solid weeks before you'd go home. That included Saturdays and Sundays. So you went to a church, and we discovered there was a newspaper that was distributed for free at all these different churches. So we talked to the editors of that newspaper and asked if they were willing to put out some of the information, a fact sheet about water and lead and what was going on with the testing and stuff. And they said yes. So they took and actually put in the newsletter, both sides. We found another organization that it's coalition of all the neighborhood organizations. And we asked them, they asked us if they could put it in there. And we said most definitely, because it reached a different audience. Of course, there was some overlap, but you had the church, the faith-based organizations that were actively involved in water distribution. So we got information out that way. We got information out through the neighborhood organizations, through Facebook. Oh my gosh, we mined Facebook, going in and discovering that, a lot of these organizations are actually working and doing things that we didn't know about what they were doing and how to help adapt to what was going on. So we went there to provide information. And I remember one time I had like two other my other coworkers in tow, and I just went up there to the lead and says, we just wanted, we're here. If anybody has any questions, we're going to be over in the corner. Oh, she goes, oh no, no, no. They put us on the agenda. We had like 10 minutes on the agenda, which we did not expect. So looking out and seeing where people get their information, how they're learning, and just trying to be there for that. But at the same time, letting them be the ones to lead that. We're not changing how they're getting the information. So I think that hopefully answers the question.
Yeah. And it's the same, because we're talking kind of to college students, it's kind of the same when you're trying to get out information to them as well. And it's just kind of thinking like what kind of media like they'll be using in terms of like maybe like mailers or newsletters or social media, just that kind of stuff. It just kind of, I guess what you're saying is to understand your audience is a great tip in terms of getting information out.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one more question for you before I open the floor up for more questions. And my question is, what can students do to account for problems of maybe not diversity or not have enough inclusion beyond just getting clubs more involved? Maybe if they want to volunteer or be a part of a nonprofit or be a part of a campaign.
Oh gosh, just so much. I think getting outside of the university can be very helpful. Aligning their organization with the efforts and activities that are going on outside of the university, it teaches, it opens eyes. I know my eyes were open when I kind of hung out with some of my friends who were part of the Cap Justice circles at Georgetown. They, I would go in with them, and they were, working with immigrants and helping the immigrants, to get settled. Um, it's just that whole eye-opening experience of just moving the work that you're doing outside the university and start collaborating with local organizations. Collaborating, but not trying to lead or tell them where to go. And very often, sometimes it's like working with the community that they may need some help in a school, and providing maybe some support in an environmental curriculum at a local school that doesn't really have the resources to be able to do special things to get kids to see the joy that the college students see in addressing environmental issues. So I think that's moving outside the, not confines, but the barrier of the college grounds.
Yeah, that's great. So that is all the questions that I have. We actually have one more about the same topic that you're talking about before. So this person said, did the involvement of the NC community, saying, North Carolina, I'm assuming, eventually change local policy in curbing the sources of pollution?
Yes, and I'll tell you how. This community, this gentleman had grown up there. He had left and he was a professor and chair of journalism department, that kind of stuff. When his parents were older, he came back to help his aged parents. And he started selling insurance on the side, and he saw what was going on in the community. So he started this community-based organization to kind of help address some of the issues in the community. But he, having grown up there, but having grown up a lot outside of the university, outside of the city, he knew he just didn't accept things just the way they were. And this is a southern town. He was African American, and it's primarily, white community, which had, North Carolina has a strange law they call extraterritorial jurisdiction, where a city can annex and control services, things like that, a certain mile radius outside of the city limits, but doesn't have to provide services. So they have this weird patchwork um, pattern of which communities were actually included in the city. And but so these people were not allowed to be involved in decision making in terms of when it came to the local utilities. So he fought back, he pushed back, but then he learned, wait a second, I need to collaborate, I need to get others involved. So he got some academic students, graduate students, to participate and help him with data collection. And then that grew. He applied for and got a grant with EPA, with one of our small grants that our office puts out. It was like $10,000, $15,000 grant to help with that data collection. But then he started expanding and getting the community. Every time he did something, he had the community there. He wasn't just doing this by himself. And then he started holding workshops. That's where he called his meetings workshops, or people that could come, bring their kids, and then there would be somebody to take care of them while the adults were doing stuff. But then he would also bring the kids in and have them kind of report out about. Um, so the city did not think and realize how this they themselves weren't as educated about what was available to local governments to addressing some of these issues. So he went ahead, he taught himself about, as a community development corporation, which he got the organization created as. But he also found out about these different kinds of community that federal government agencies were offering, and helped them, the local city government, to actually get grant, do the grant applications and get grants to address the water infrastructure issues. So it changed the policy. It didn't necessarily change local policy. It changed local action on how they were responding to these concerns about poor water infrastructure, and which were the source of the pollution. And it ended up making the community much stronger as a group, as in total, so that even though they weren't necessarily within the official city limits of the city, people still thought the local government considered them part of the city. And that was a big mindset change.
That's absolutely amazing. It's great hearing stories like that, because sometimes it's kind of hard to stay motivated,
Mm-hmm.
especially when people consider sometimes these issues a complete non-issue. Um, but that's great. Oh, the person said that it was very helpful, and thank
Okay,
you.
cool. Well, I want to add, can I?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I want to add that there are a lot of places where you can see similar success stories. We have them on our EPA website. If you go to epa.gov/environmental justice, and you can see a lot of different success stories. We have a blog. It's called E in Action. So if you were to type in EPA EJ in Action blog, if you were to Google that, that would take you to our blog. And we're, unlike a lot of federal agency blogs, which are usually written by staffers, our blogs are being written by those who are working on the ground trying to address environmental justice, and how they work with and have been collaborating with agencies, whether local government or EPA. And so that's a good source for some of these kind of stories where people have made some real change in addressing their issues. That's one place I would recommend people take a look.
You said it's called EJ in Action?
Yes, EJ in Action. It's part of the EPA suite of blogs that EPA puts
I
out.
think I found it. I'm going to link it in the chat so people can click on it if they want to.
Yeah, that looks to be right.
All
Mm-hmm.
right. And anyone who's watching, oh, somebody asked a question. I just want to say that anybody else who wants to ask a question, you can just put it in the chat and we'll definitely get to it. We still have around 20 minutes before the webinar just stops recording. So she said, having just graduated from college, how do you recommend that I get involved in the environmental justice movement? I'm very passionate about the field, but I haven't been able to find many open positions or organizations focusing specifically on it.
Okay. That's a very good question. I got my own child just graduated college, and she's looking for jobs too. So I know that when you've got your eyes set on a certain type of work, that it seems like there aren't any openings, and so that often is the case. Sometimes you have to approach it by looking in another area. But somebody who's just graduated from college, there's some things you can do, I think, that can expose you more and get you some. For example, the Department of Energy has this fellowship program called RISE, ORISE, and I forgot what it stands for, but EPA has bought into that fellowship program. So EPA hires these fellows. It's paid internship, the paid fellowship. Usually a 1 year fellowship, and thank you very much. And it usually can be extended for a second year. And you are a fellow, and you work in, like, we've had a couple of fellows in our office over the years who are ORISE fellows that work on projects. They're an integral part of our team, particularly when you are limited from hiring full-time employees. So that's one way, is to look and see what kind of opportunities are popping up in an area that you're interested in through that ORISE function. And it's not limited just to EPA or DOE. It's a lot of different federal agencies are using that fellowship program as a way to bring in young people, college grads, even some undergraduates, to help us to grow that next generation. That's one way. There are internship opportunities. Somebody who's interested in law. We EPA has an environmental law intern program during the summer, throughout the year. So people who are in law school can actually come in and be an intern, a legal intern, and they're usually given a project or two that's related to legal analysis, things like that. There are sometimes you're going to have to separate the paid job from the volunteering job. Sometimes what you're passionate about may not be the way to go. You may not be able to get paid for that, but that shouldn't stop you from wanting to engage with your local community, with wanting to see what they are, what kind of skill set you can offer them. Oh, I did forget one other one. Consider the Peace Corps. That's a quasi-governmental organization, and so people who complete their Peace Corps obligations actually have special advantages, hired on in a non-competitive manner into the federal agency. So we actually have in the last 2 years, we hired about 4 or 5 individuals who came out of Peace Corps work, and they're different ages, and they have worked on social justice issues firsthand in communities all across the world. So that's another opportunity. But I would say if you're really wanting to stay in the getting to know people and working with local people, and then networking. And that's one of the things I would say to do, to be able to try to take it to the next steps, because there aren't that many open or paid jobs initially. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. And also I'm sure it helps me too, because I am in college, so I will soon have to be looking for jobs. If anybody else has any questions, you can just type it in the chat function. I'll wait for maybe like 10, 15, 20 seconds. If not, then we're going to wrap up the webinar. But I'll just kind of wait if the typing's taking a long time, or if the question is long or anything like that. And you'll see that I linked to the blog that Victoria was talking about, and also OPIs, which is the internship I was talking about as well. Okay, so it looks like nobody else has any more questions. Okay. I'm just talking very slowly because I'm seeing if anybody else is going to ask anything else. Okay, I think that wraps up this webinar. Thank you so much for being a presenter. It was great having you, and you were really informative. Definitely great for the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, and I do appreciate the invite, and it's been it's good being able to reach out and continue to engage, and I love hearing more about what students' concerns are, and because those are the next generation, and we've got to be able to groom them and help them to reach those next steps. So I appreciate it. So any questions, anytime anybody has any questions, you can always email me, and um, I think you've got my email address, right? That you
Yeah,
could.
I put it in, yeah, in the chat function. Also, Jim says thank you so much for taking the time to set this up. So,
I think
Jim,
he meant that for you. Yes.
well, okay, but also definitely for you presenting as well. So I'll put your email in. Okay, Jim says for both of you. So, so I'll put your email right in the chat, and then I'm just going to, I think, stop recording. Just very, very quickly get this email on there and just, okay, there we go.
Thank you. Oh, you're a fast typist.
I just copied and pasted. It wasn't typing.
Okay, cool. All right,
Okay,
yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
yep, thank you. So everyone else, we're gonna have one more webinar. I said before, I think it's on August 11th on how to empower students in environmental clubs. We have the handout that has all the links to get more involved. And I think that's it. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming and asking questions. And hopefully see you for next webinar. All right.
Okay. Thank
Bye.
you. All right. Bye-bye.